Warning, this episode contains content that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Dear Mrs. Budd, I call on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook and eat it.
Hampton Howard, a.k.a. Albert Fish, the Wolf of Wysteria. He was this old grandfatherly-looking guy who looked weak, fragile, and above all harmless. But he was this child murderer, torturer who spent his whole life preying on children. He was born May 19th, 1870.
Hamilton, he was just like a different type of child. His father was 43 years old, and he had mental illnesses before we even knew it. Wait, I feel like I see him right now. Hamilton? He just constantly shows up and just leaves. Even his family, too. His uncle has delusions. His brother's in a mental hospital. His sister has mental afflictions. I didn't think it was going to end up this way.
Let's explore the life of Albert Fish. We can do this by first knowing the other felonies he committed. Fish had a criminal background way before his killings. He was arrested over 8 times for larceny, passing bad checks, and violating probation. His murderous and torturous ways started when Albert's 75-year-old father passed away due to a heart attack. The Fish family fell on hard times. Mrs. Fish, not being able to financially support the family, gave her son to St. John's Orphanage around the age of 5. There's when he started to call himself Albert after a deceased sibling, trying to escape his unwanted nickname of Ham and Eggs that he was teased with during his years in the orphanage. In his years at the orphanage, teachers would regularly punish him by beating/whipping when they stripped naked in front of each other. From this, he started his taste in sadomasochism, where he would enjoy getting and inflicting pain. He would get erections from what he had witnessed with the other naked boys. He stayed in that orphanage until he was the age of 9 years old. From there on is when he started to be the cannibal serial killer that we know today. The span of his killings is from 1924 through 1932. But how many people did he kill?
He also confessed to at least 100 other incidents. I've had children in every state, Fish teased.
What was his reason to kill?
Albert. God? Yes. It is me. It is God. However, I need you to do something for me. I need you to sexually abuse and mutilate all the children I have put down before you. Do you hear me, Albert?
Yes, I shall.
Fish underwent psychiatric evaluations off and on throughout his lifetime. Doctors would later diagnose Fish as having an abnormal psychopathic personality with a hint of early senility. But he wasn't considered to be insane.
Out of his hundreds of killings, there was only a few known victims. One was 19-year-old Thomas Cadden. Albert was in a sadomasochistic relationship with the mentally disabled 19-year-old Thomas Cadden. He was at the age of 18 years old at the time, but it was unclear whether they actually did have a consensual relationship. But during this is where he began to satisfy his sadistic curiosities. Albert led Thomas to a farmhouse that was secluded, which is where he tortured him for 2 weeks. This is because Albert didn't want to go with his original plan of killing Thomas. Albert took a pair of scissors and cut off half of Thomas's penis to keep as a souvenir. Albert cleaned the wounds and gave him $10 as consolation. It's unknown what happened to Thomas after this incident. Another was 8-year-old Francis McDonald. 8-year-old Francis McDonald was playing at the park when Fish lured him to him. The boy's body was found later under some branches in the woods near where a neighbor had seen Francis and an old man go earlier that afternoon. Francis had been badly beaten and strangled with his own suspenders. And lastly, the most famous of all, 10-year-old Grace Budd.
So, can you describe for me Hamilton a little bit?
He was a nice young man, hard worker too. Our family considered him a really good friend. So when he asked to get Grace to go with him to the birthday party, my husband and I thought it was okay, so we didn't hesitate. That was the last time we saw her.
He took her to this house where he told her to wait outside. Once he got undressed inside, he told her to come in. He strangled her and cut her into tiny pieces to eat her. It wasn't until 7 years later where the Budds received a detailed letter about what happened to little Grace.
Thank you for inviting me to the party.
My pleasure. You stay here. I'll go get something. Grace, can you come in here, please?
Okay.
So the party's over here.
Over there?
Yeah.
Okay. She was just a child, my sweet, innocent baby girl, eating like a piece of turkey.
The anonymous letter received by the Budds was brought to the police. It was able to be traced back to Fish, so he was arrested. And in the other picture, it was showed that he was going to stand trial for the murder of Grace Budd.
How do you plead? He pleads guilty by insanity.
Objection!
Objection granted. I hereby sentence you to death by electrocution.
The evidence that was found against Fish was in the rear bedroom, which held human bones and a cleaver that was used to cut his victims. Additionally, his masochist ways was discovered in an x-ray with 24 to 29 needles lodged in his scrotum.
I like to inflict pain.
The trial took place on March 11, 1935. He pled insanity, but he was only found guilty for the murder of Grace Budd because the other killings held no evidence. So he was sentenced to death by electrocution in Sing Sing prison on January 16, 1936, at 66 years old.
Ultimate pain.
Years after his death, the memory and stories of what he has done haunts the sleep of small children at night. He is Hamilton Howard, a.k.a. Albert Fish, the Gray Man, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, the most popular, the Boogeyman, and of course, the Wolf of Wysteria.